The world just told Trump no, in writing. On March 17, 2026, day 17 of the US-Iran war, the European Union's top foreign affairs official, Kaja Kallas, emerged from a meeting of all 27 EU foreign ministers and delivered 4 words that landed like a verdict. There is no appetite. Not for naval escorts, not for coalition membership, not for any military role in a strait that carries 1/5 of the world's oil supply. France said no, Germany said no, Japan said no, Australia said no, Italy said no, Spain said no, and China, the country that imports 90% of its energy through the Strait of Hormuz, called for a ceasefire instead of deploying a single vessel. The most powerful military alliance in human history is hemorrhaging $12 billion in confirmed war costs. The world's most critical oil shipping lane has collapsed from 138 daily transits to 5. And the United States is now standing alone at a choke point it cannot hold without help, it cannot obtain. What happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether your fuel costs, your inflation rate, and the stability of every financial market you're exposed to will get significantly worse. Before this video ends, 4 questions will be answered. Each one is more consequential than the last. Loop 1. China depends on the Strait of Hormuz for 90% of its oil imports. That figure comes directly from US President Donald Trump, confirmed on the record. Yet Beijing has refused to join any coalition to reopen the waterway. The question every energy analyst is currently avoiding is this: why would the country most economically damaged by this closure actively refuse to help end it? The answer is not what you think. Loop 2. On March 11th, the International Energy Agency coordinated the single largest emergency oil release in recorded history, 401.9 million barrels drawn from strategic reserves across 32 nations. The markets didn't recover, they kept climbing. Al Jazeera's economic desk reported Brent crude topping $106 per barrel on March 16th, after the release was announced. The financial mechanism that 401.9 million barrels cannot fix has not been named publicly. We will name it. Loop 3. Reuters confirmed on March 11th that the first 6 days of this conflict cost the United States $11.3 billion. The Center for Strategic and International Studies updated that figure, $16.5 billion by day 12. A top Trump White House advisor confirmed $12 billion on record to Al Jazeera on March 15th. The escalating cost trajectory points to a number that Trump's own economic team is warning him about privately. That number matters because it is the same force that ended every major U.S. military operation of the last 30 years. Loop 4. The question nobody on television has yet framed correctly is this: if America's closest allies will not escort commercial ships through Hormuz, who actually controls the global oil supply right now? Not the United States, not OPEC. The answer sits at the intersection of military doctrine and energy economics. And by the end of this video, you will hold it with more precision than most analysts currently do. By the time this video ends, you will understand the collapse of the Hormuz coalition at a level that most foreign affairs analysts watching this unfold do not yet have, because they are reading the diplomatic story. What we are reading is the financial architecture beneath it. Stay with me, because the cost of this coalition failure is not being absorbed by governments. It is being absorbed by every household that fills a tank, pays a utility bill, or holds assets in a market currently pricing in scenarios that no official spokesperson will name publicly. If you want to understand what is happening before it becomes front-page news, this channel is where you need to be. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated surprise airstrikes against multiple military sites across Iran. The Israeli Air Force deployed approximately 200 fighter jets and struck 500 military targets across western and central Iran. U.S. aircraft operating from Gulf-based installations and carrier strike groups simultaneously struck Iranian air defense infrastructure and missile production facilities. Within hours, Iran retaliated under what Tehran named Operation True Promise to 4, a wave of missile and drone strikes directed at Israel, U.S. forward bases, and Gulf partner facilities. That opening exchange set the conflict's tempo. Within the first 100 hours, the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated U.S. expenditure at $3.7 billion. By day 6, Reuters confirmed the Pentagon had briefed Congress on a total cost of $11.3 billion. By day 12, CSI has placed that figure at $16.5 billion. The escalation rate, approximately $1 to $2 billion per day, is the number that is now reshaping every internal White House debate about when and how this war ends. The Strait of Hormuz did not close on day 1. Iran's escalating response built toward it. By the second week, Iran had attacked at least 16 commercial vessels operating in and around the Persian Gulf, the Strait, and the Gulf of Oman, according to the UK Maritime Trade Operations Center. Daily transits, which historically average 138 ships per day, had fallen to no more than 5. The largest oil supply disruption in the recorded history of global energy markets was now underway, confirmed by the International Energy Agency on March 13th. Trump asked approximately 7 countries to join a naval coalition on or around March 15th. He received, in every publicly confirmed case, either a direct refusal or silence. By March 17th, Axios, AP, France 24, and the Los Angeles Times had all independently verified the same diplomatic reality. The coalition had not materialized. This is not the first time a U.S. president launched a major Middle East military operation and then sought Allied participation after the fact. But the sequence has never been this inverted. In January 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell delivered a 75-minute presentation to the United Nations Security Council, months before the first strike on Iraq. President George W. Bush assembled what he publicly called a coalition of the willing, comprising more than 40 nations. That coalition was assembled before the first bomb fell. The diplomatic architecture preceded the military operation. Trump launched strikes on Iran on February 28, 2026, without consulting a single NATO ally in advance, according to multiple reporting sources including Axios and France 24. He then asked for coalition participation on day 15. The Irwan Lagadek of George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs stated it plainly to AFP on March 17th. The United States launched a war without consulting allies, expecting them to mop up the mess. That is not a political observation. It is a structural description of a coalition-building sequence that was executed in reverse. The financial parallel from 1990 is equally instructive. When Iraq seized Kuwait's oil fields in August of that year, the first U.S. response was diplomatic, assembling 34 nations before a single coalition aircraft crossed a border. The result was a 17% stabilization in oil prices within 6 weeks of the UN resolution. In 2026, oil has risen more than 40% since the opening strike, from approximately $60 per barrel at the start of this year to $104 at market open on March 17th. The financial structure driving the 1990 Gulf War response was Allied burden sharing. The financial structure this time is unilateral burden absorption. And that is a fundamentally different equation. But the question nobody is asking yet is this: what does it mean for the US dollar's global reserve currency position when Washington can no longer finance a coalition and must finance a choke point alone? That question will be answered in Section 5. But that historical parallel only tells us half of what is happening. The other half is financial, and it is the half that the headlines are ignoring. 17 days into the conflict, Iran has not been neutralized as a force capable of threatening commercial shipping. Reuters confirmed that Tehran has attacked at least 16 vessels since February 28th. Iran struck oil tankers in Iraqi waters. A drone reportedly hit a fuel storage tank at Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest airport, handling over 87 million passengers annually, forcing a temporary suspension of all flight operations. The U.S. military is conducting active strikes against Iranian anti-ship missile positions along the Hormuz shoreline, according to Axios, reporting confirmed March 17th. Those assets have not been fully degraded. The tactical situation at the Strait remains unresolved. Brent crude closed above $106 per barrel on March 16th, according to Al Jazeera's energy desk. That represents an increase of more than 40% from the $60 per barrel price at which oil traded at the start of 2026. Goldman Sachs and Macquarie have both raised their price forecasts to $150 per barrel should the Strait of Hormuz remain effectively closed for a further 2 months. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has publicly threatened $200 per barrel. The IEA's record 1.9 million barrel emergency release, described by the agency itself as by far the largest ever, failed to reverse the upward price trajectory. Al Jazeera's strategic analysis confirmed that the release can calm markets but cannot fix a physical Hormuz disruption. It is a financial bandage on a logistical wound. The number that puts this in consumer terms: every sustained $10 per barrel increase in oil, held for more than 30 days, historically adds approximately 0.25 to 0.35 percentage points to headline inflation in major import-dependent economies. Oil is currently $44 higher than it was 75 days ago. Gold moved from $5,296 to $5,423 per troy ounce in the 72 hours following the February 28th strikes, according to CNBC market data. That is the signature of institutional capital repositioning into safe haven assets. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell more than 400 points in the conflict's opening days. J.P. Morgan's Global Research Division flagged oil, gold, and aluminum as the 3 commodities carrying the highest upside risk from this conflict. The financial implication of an extended Hormuz closure for bond yields, inflation expectations, and central bank rate policy has not yet been fully priced into Western equity markets. Domain 4, Alliance Reactions and Diplomatic Signals, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas stated on March 17th. This is not Europe's war. France's Emmanuel Macron formally rejected coalition membership, committing to a defensive and protective posture. Germany's Foreign Minister Boris Pistorius stated, "This is not our war. We didn't start it." Japan and Australia both confirmed on March 16th they had no plans to send naval vessels. China called on all parties to immediately cease military operations, a position that carries a specific strategic logic we will examine in the next section. Trump, speaking at the White House on March 17th, said he was greatly disappointed in the responses. He simultaneously claimed, "We don't need anybody," and threatened that a failure to assist would be very bad for NATO's future. That contradiction between projecting strength and demanding help is itself a signal. Confident powers do not threaten alliances to obtain cooperation. They obtain it through demonstrated shared interest. But the consequences you just heard are only the surface. What the financial markets are quietly pricing in right now is a scenario that none of the officials at those podiums are willing to name publicly. The official American position, as of March 17, 2026, is that the war's military objectives have been largely met, that Iranian air defenses, missile production facilities, and naval capacity have been significantly degraded. The official coalition-building narrative frames the Hormuz situation as a global commons problem. Every nation dependent on Gulf oil has a shared interest in keeping the waterway open and should contribute accordingly. On the surface, this appears to be a reasonable burden-sharing argument. The logic is not without merit. The implementation has failed entirely. Step back from the battlefield for a moment. While officials speak of military success and imminent coalition formation, the energy futures market is telling a different story. Brent crude did not fall after the IEA's record 401.9 million barrel release. It climbed. Goldman Sachs did not lower its price forecast after 17 days of U.S. strikes. It raised its peak projection to $150. The gap between the official narrative, that the situation is under control, and the financial reality, that markets see no near-term resolution, is precisely where the analytical truth lives. The mechanism the IEA release cannot fix is this. A strategic reserve release addresses a supply volume problem. It cannot address a routing problem. The oil exists. The ships carrying it cannot safely transit a 34-kilometer-wide choke point currently patrolled by Iranian fast attack vessels and protected by shore-based anti-ship missile systems that U.S. forces have not yet fully neutralized. The 401.9 million barrels are sitting in storage in Asia and Europe. They will flow immediately in Asia, per Bloomberg's March 15th report. But the physical infrastructure to replace Hormuz routing does not exist at scale. The financial markets understand this. The official press conferences do not acknowledge it. According to Reuters reporting, confirmed March 15th, a top Trump advisor stated the war price tag stood at approximately $12 billion. CSIS data shows the cost accelerating, from $11.3 billion at day 6 to $16.5 billion by day 12. Extrapolated at conservative estimates of $1 billion per day, the 17-day total now approaches $20 billion. That cost is being absorbed entirely by the United States Treasury. No ally is sharing it. No coalition partner is paying it. The financial burden of the world's most critical oil choke point is currently resting on one balance sheet. Now close the loop on China. China imports 90% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, confirmed by Trump himself. China's economy is the second largest on Earth. The closure of Hormuz is inflicting direct, measurable financial damage on China. Every single day, the disruption continues. Yet China has refused to join a coalition to reopen it. Beijing instead called for all parties to immediately cease military operations. That is not the behavior of a country acting in its near-term economic interest. That is the behavior of a country executing a long-term strategic calculation. Every day that U.S. forces stand alone at Hormuz, bearing the full financial and military cost, is a day that Washington's claim to global leadership is visibly strained. Every ally that publicly refuses to join is a documented data point in the argument that American military power can no longer command multilateral cooperation. Beijing does not need to fire a single shot in this conflict to benefit from its outcome. It needs only to wait and let the cost accumulate on someone else's balance sheet. The answer to the loop planted in Section 3 is now visible. The U.S. dollar's reserve currency status rests, in significant part, on the assumption that America can project and sustain military credibility at global choke points. When that credibility requires Allied validation to hold, and the Allies publicly decline, the assumption is being tested in real time, not by an adversary, by an absence. De-escalation would require Iran to open the strait to commercial traffic, either through a negotiated agreement or a unilateral decision by the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, that the economic cost to Iran's remaining partners has become unsustainable. This would likely require a U.S. commitment to halt offensive strikes and a third-party diplomatic framework, potentially through Oman. which has served as a back channel before. If this scenario materializes within the next 2 to 3 weeks, Goldman Sachs' own modeling suggests Brent crude could retreat toward $80 to $90 per barrel. Inflation pressure in Europe and Asia would stabilize. The IEA reserves release would be credited as having bought the diplomatic window. The more likely near-term scenario, based on current diplomatic positioning, is that no coalition forms, the U.S. conducts Hormuz escort operations unilaterally, and the strait remains partially functional, at 5 to 10 daily transits rather than the historical 138. Oil holds in the $95 to $115 range. The daily U.S. cost of approximately $1 billion continues accumulating. Chatham House projects that sustained oil at these levels would add approximately 0.5 percentage points to headline inflation across Europe and Asia in 2026 alone. For households already absorbing the residual inflation of the post-2022 period, that addition is not marginal. The specific trigger that pushes this to the next level would be confirmed Iranian mining of the Strait of Hormuz, or a successful strike on a major Gulf oil export terminal. Iran's IRGC has already threatened $200 per barrel publicly. Goldman Sachs places a formal $150 ceiling under a 2-month full closure. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20% of the world's oil supply. A complete sustained closure removes that share from the tradable global market simultaneously. Analysts at Macquarie confirm the $150 projection. In this scenario, the inflationary impact on Western economies, particularly those in Europe, dependent on LNG and crude imports, would not be measured in half percentage point increments. Regardless of which path this conflict takes, one outcome has already become irreversible. The United States has confirmed to every nation on Earth that it will launch a major military operation without Allied consultation, and then demand their participation in managing the consequences. That diplomatic precedent cannot be unset. It will define every alliance negotiation that follows this conflict for at least a decade. Close loop 4. The country controlling the global oil supply right now is not the United States, not OPEC, and not Iran. It is the Strait of Hormuz itself, a 34-kilometer geographic constraint that no nation currently controls with sufficient authority to reopen. When this video opened, the claim was simple. The world told Trump no, in writing. What the evidence now confirms is something more structurally significant than a diplomatic rebuff. This is the architecture of a superpower, encountering the compounded cost of 15 months of alliance erosion at the precise moment it needs those alliances most. Every tariff, every insult, every threat against NATO, every Greenland ultimatum, none of those were free. They carried a deferred diplomatic price. That price came due on March 17, 2026, and it arrived denominated in oil barrels, not press releases. 3 facts to hold from this analysis. 1. The Strait of Hormuz has fallen from 138 daily ship transits to 5. The IEA has deployed the largest emergency oil reserve release in history, 401.9 million barrels. The markets have not recovered. The physical routing problem cannot be solved by financial instruments. 2. The confirmed U.S. cost of this conflict is approximately $16.5 billion by day 12, accelerating at an estimated $1 to $2 billion per day. 0 allied nations are sharing that cost. The financial burden of the world's most strategically critical choke point is resting on a single national balance sheet. 3. China, the country most economically exposed to the Hormuz closure with 90% of its oil imports at risk, is not joining a coalition to reopen it. That behavior is not economic. It is strategic. And the strategic calculation it represents is the most consequential signal to emerge from this conflict for the long-term architecture of global power. The answer to the final question, whether the U.S. dollar's reserve currency position can survive a prolonged demonstration that American military credibility now requires Allied consent it cannot obtain, will not come from any press conference or official statement. It will come from the bond market, the energy futures curve, and the quiet repositioning of sovereign wealth funds that are already watching this unfold. When that signal arrives, we will be here to break it down before it becomes front-page news. If what you understood in the last 15 minutes is not what you heard on the evening news, then you already know why this channel exists. Share this with someone who is still reading the headline version